I remember when I first met Adam. It was years ago, at a coffee shop on a rainy afternoon. I'd been new to the city, lost in my own world of expectations and disappointments, when his eyes caught mine from across the room. I was immediately drawn to the warmth in his gaze, the kind that made you feel like everything would be all right, even if the world outside was falling apart. But that was then. Now, Adam and I had become something we never intended. Something distant, quiet. His touch no longer held the spark it once did. He'd stop by the kitchen on his way out in the morning, kiss my cheek as if it were a habit, not a choice. When we spoke, our conversation seemed to circle around the same things: work, bills, what we were having for dinner. We had become two people coexisting, not living. And I had been silent. I never spoke about how I felt because somewhere along the way I convinced myself it didn't matter. But it did. I noticed it more on the nights when he'd fall asleep with his back to me, his breathing slow and steady. I would lie there wide awake staring at the ceiling, feeling a weight pressing on my chest. A hollow ache that no amount of wine or warm baths could fill. I wanted to reach out to pull him back to me, but I didn't know how. So I didn't. And he didn't either. It wasn't until Mark came along that I even remembered what it was like to feel alive. Mark wasn't anything like Adam. Where Adam was steady and reliable, Mark was unpredictable. Where Adam was calm and patient, Mark was sharp and energetic, quick to laugh and even quicker to tease. He had a way about him that made everything seem exciting, even when it was the most mundane thing in the world. Our work lunches, which had once felt like just another part of the day, became the highlight of mine. When we spoke, it was like the rest of the world fell away. It wasn't love at first sight, but it was something magnetic. I didn't understand it at first. I thought it was just a friendship. But as time went on, it became clear that neither of us was being entirely honest. It started with the way Mark would look at me, his gaze lingering just a second longer than necessary, a slight curve of his lips when our hands brushed. Small things, insignificant, but they felt significant. A silent invitation to something more, something unspoken. I found myself laughing at jokes I didn't find funny, listening intently when he spoke, even when it wasn't important. I wanted his approval in ways that felt off, but it was flattering. I hadn't felt flattered in a long time. One evening after work, he suggested we grab a drink. It wasn't unusual, but something about the way he said it caught me off guard. There was an intensity behind it, a quiet confidence that made my heart race in a way I hadn't felt in ages. I agreed without hesitation. I told myself it was just two colleagues having a drink. But deep down I knew it wasn't. I hadn't realized how far I'd gone until we were sitting across from each other in the dimly lit bar. The conversation had turned from work to something else entirely, something personal, and I felt myself opening up in ways I hadn't in years. Mark listened to me in a way that Adam no longer did. He made me feel seen, understood, like I mattered. Somewhere between the second and third drink, Mark's hand found mine. It wasn't sudden, it wasn't forceful. It was just there. Warm, comforting, and it felt like a small spark of something I'd been craving for so long. I didn't pull away. I didn't want to. His fingers traced the lines of my palm gently, almost absently. I was captivated by the softness of his touch. I didn't have to look up to know the way he was staring at me. The space between us closed, and without thinking, my face leaned in. I could feel the heat of his breath, feel my pulse quicken. When he kissed me, it wasn't just a kiss. It was an explosion of something that had been building inside me for months. It wasn't about lust. It was about feeling alive, feeling wanted. Adam had stopped looking at me that way long ago. He had stopped making me feel like I was the only woman in the world. And now here was Mark with his intense gaze and his soft lips, giving me everything I'd been longing for. I pulled away, shocked by what had just happened. A wave of guilt washed over me. But it was quickly replaced by something else: exhilaration. This felt dangerous. Wrong, yes. But also intoxicating in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. We didn't speak for a moment. I didn't know what to say. And neither did he. But then he smiled, and there was a reassurance in that smile, as though he knew exactly what we were both feeling. I wanted to run to tell him it was a mistake, but I couldn't move. I couldn't even bring myself to stand up and leave. We didn't talk about it, not directly, but the rest of the evening was different. Every glance, every touch, every word felt loaded with meaning. When we parted ways, I walked back to my car in a daze, my head spinning. I wasn't sure what I had just done, but I knew one thing for certain. My life had just changed. And the guilt? The guilt was buried deep beneath the surface, swallowed by the rush of emotions I didn't fully understand. The next day I told myself it was a mistake, that it would never happen again. But it did. Again and again I found myself pulled to him. We'd meet in quiet corners of the office, share furtive smiles, whispered words. The connection between us grew stronger with every passing day. But so did the guilt. Every time I kissed him, every time I held his hand or shared a laugh, I felt the weight of it. I was betraying Adam, my husband, the man who had given me everything, the man who still kissed my forehead every morning, who still came home every night, even though I was slipping away from him. I wasn't sure when it became more than just a physical connection, but it did. And by the time I realized it, it was too late. The line between what I was doing and what I thought I could get away with had blurred. I knew I couldn't go back, not now. What was the point? I thought I was in control. But deep down I knew I wasn't. And in the quiet moments when the day ended and I lay next to Adam in bed, I felt the cold reality of what I'd started to slip into. I was no longer just lost in the routine. I was lost in something else entirely. And soon the world I'd built would come crashing down. But for now it was all too thrilling to stop. The weeks that followed were a blur of secrets and lies, each day feeling like a new chapter in a book I couldn't stop reading, even though I knew the ending would tear me apart. I didn't want to stop, but I knew I should. Every glance, every stolen moment, felt like a dangerous game I was playing, a game that was slowly suffocating me. But I couldn't pull away. Mark and I had become tangled in something deeper than I'd anticipated, something I didn't know how to escape. He was never far from my mind. Every text, every conversation, felt like a thread pulling me closer to him. I knew it wasn't just physical anymore. It was emotional too. He made me feel important, something I hadn't felt in so long. And when we were together, it felt like nothing else in the world mattered. I remember one afternoon the office was quiet, almost too quiet. Mark's words, laced with something playful, drew me away from my work. His eyes caught mine across the room, and without a single word we both knew what the moment was. He stood up casually like he had all the time in the world and walked over to me. It was as if no one else existed. When he spoke, it wasn't just his voice. It was the way he looked at me, the way his presence felt like a magnetic pull. Everything about him, from the sharpness of his smile to the fire in his eyes, made me feel something I hadn't in so long. I couldn't even remember the last time Adam made me feel that way. The conversations we had, even about nothing in particular, became moments I cherished. With Adam it was routine, predictable, safe. But with Mark it was exhilarating. Our words were electric, charged with something neither of us had openly acknowledged, but both knew was there. The tension between us grew thicker with every passing day. I felt the guilt creeping in, the kind that gnawed at the back of my mind, but I refused to confront it. Instead I welcomed it, fed into it. The more I pushed the boundaries, the more alive I felt. I had told myself it was nothing serious, just harmless fun. But deep down I knew that wasn't true. And when Mark would laugh at something I said, or smile in that way that made everything inside me flutter, I would tell myself it didn't matter. I thought about Adam, of course. I always did. His quiet affection, his love, his unwavering loyalty. But it wasn't enough anymore. The love that had once felt so certain had slipped through my fingers like sand, too fine to hold on to. And though I felt guilty, though I hated myself for what I was doing, I couldn't stop. Mark and I became bolder. The stolen kisses in the stairwells, the lingering touches when we brushed past each other. It all started to feel inevitable. I knew it was wrong, I knew it was betrayal, but it was also something I hadn't realized I craved so badly. The rush of passion, the intensity of being wanted, the thrill of someone seeing me for who I was beyond the wife and the mother. The woman I had buried deep inside when I put on the roles of a dutiful wife. Then one night it happened. I knew even before we went to dinner that it would. It was a quiet, almost oppressive certainty. We talked, laughed, drank, and the tension between us was unbearable. He touched my hand under the table, and I could feel my pulse race. He didn't have to say a word. We both knew the moment had arrived. I wanted him. Needed him, maybe. And when he leaned in to kiss me, I didn't pull away. It was nothing like what Adam and I had. This kiss was hungry, desperate, and full of something I didn't understand. It felt like the breaking point, the one moment I couldn't go back from. It wasn't the kiss itself that left me breathless. It was the knowledge that everything had changed. I had just crossed a line that would leave me irreparably damaged. But I didn't care. Not in that moment. Because with Mark I wasn't invisible. I wasn't the woman who had lost herself in the routine of marriage. I was someone new, someone desired. And for the first time in a long time I felt powerful. That night we didn't just kiss. We didn't just talk. We crossed a line I never imagined I would. And in the aftermath, as we lay there together, tangled in the sheets, I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and guilt. Mark's touch had burned me, had made me feel more alive than I had in ages. But I knew that I had just shattered something I could never rebuild. The days that followed were filled with a kind of silence that was heavier than any argument. Adam had begun to notice the distance between us. The way I didn't look at him the same way anymore. The way I wasn't present when we were together. But he didn't know why. I didn't want him to know. I couldn't bear to see the pain in his eyes, to see the trust shatter in real time. But there were moments when I couldn't hide it anymore. I couldn't hide the guilt, the longing, the secret that was eating me alive. I had to lie. I had to make excuses. I had to keep playing the part of the loving wife. But in the back of my mind I knew I was failing. And then there was Mark. He was always there even when I didn't see him. Even when we weren't physically together, I could feel him in my thoughts. His touch lingered in my mind like a poison, like a drug I couldn't quit. Every time I saw him, it was a reminder of everything I was losing, everything I had lost, but it was also a reminder of everything I wanted, everything I needed. I tried to convince myself that what I was doing wasn't a betrayal, that Adam had stopped being present long before Mark came along. I told myself it was just a phase. But it wasn't. It was something deeper. It was a need for validation, for excitement, for the feeling of being seen, truly seen. And as I sank deeper into this affair, I realized something horrifying. I was starting to crave it more than I craved Adam's love. There was no going back now. The affair had become a part of me, a part of my daily routine, something I couldn't shake off. Every conversation with Adam felt like a performance. Every time he touched me I flinched, knowing I wasn't really there, that my body wasn't truly his anymore. But I couldn't stop it. I didn't know how. And the guilt? The guilt was suffocating. But the desire, the thrill of Mark's presence, of his touch, it was addictive. I couldn't escape it. I didn't want to. I thought I could control it, thought I could keep it hidden, keep both worlds separate. But the truth was I was living a lie. And I knew deep down that the moment I confessed, everything would fall apart. And yet, the longer I stayed in this twisted dance, the less I cared. I hadn't expected Adam to find out the way he did. It wasn't a confrontation or a heated argument. It wasn't an accidental discovery. It was the quiet before the storm, when I walked in one evening to find him standing in the hallway, holding my phone. His face was unreadable, but his grip on the device was tight, as if it might shatter in his hands. I froze. The room felt suddenly too small, like the walls were closing in. The familiar, comfortable silence between us had been replaced by something heavy, suffocating. Adam didn't say anything right away. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes was enough. His eyes weren't full of anger or frustration. They were full of disappointment, of hurt, and that hit me harder than I could have imagined. He didn't shout. He didn't break down. He just asked in the calmest voice I'd ever heard, "Why?" I couldn't answer him at first. I opened my mouth but nothing came out. What could I say? How could I explain it? How could I explain the need that had driven me to this, the emptiness that had become too much to bear, the way Mark made me feel alive again? I wanted to say everything but the words never formed. All I had was silence, and that was the most damning part. Adam stared at me, his face unreadable, the silence stretching between us like an unspoken accusation. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized that this wasn't a moment that could be fixed with an apology. No amount of apologies would undo the damage. He had seen the texts, the messages, the lingering evidence of my betrayal. The lies I had so carefully woven were now hanging in the air between us, unraveling one thread at a time. "Why?" he asked again, and this time there was something almost broken in his voice. A tremor I hadn't noticed before. And that's when it hit me. I had just destroyed everything. The guilt washed over me, a cold, suffocating tide. But I couldn't tell him the truth. The truth that this had never been about Mark alone. It had been about me. About a marriage that had withered under the weight of complacency. About a woman who had been drowning in silence for too long. And about a man who, despite his best intentions, hadn't even noticed she was slowly slipping away. I opened my mouth again, but the words wouldn't come. What could I say? That I didn't feel seen anymore? That I had sought someone else's gaze because Adam's had become so distant? That I had crossed a line I couldn't come back from? He didn't wait for me to speak. He didn't need me to. His face hardened and he turned away, walking toward the bedroom. I stood there paralyzed, as if the ground had been ripped out from beneath me. The night passed in a blur. I tried to talk to him, to explain, to apologize, but the words never felt right. Adam didn't look at me. He didn't engage with me. He had retreated into something else. A shell of the man I knew, of the man I loved. The quietness of the house was deafening, and I couldn't stand it. Every step I took seemed to echo in the emptiness. When I tried to touch him, to hold him, to reach out, he flinched away. It was subtle at first, but unmistakable. There was a coldness in his touch, a distance that hadn't been there before. He wouldn't even let me hold his hand. And when I tried to kiss him, he turned his face, a gesture that felt sharper than any words he could have said. I hadn't realized the depth of the rift I had created until that moment. The trust was gone. Gone as if it had never existed. And it hurt more than I could have imagined. This wasn't just about an affair. This wasn't just about the lies. It was about the fact that, in that moment, I wasn't even a stranger to him. I was someone he didn't know how to forgive. I couldn't fix it. I knew that. Adam's silence was a kind of death sentence. He wasn't angry, he was hurt. He didn't lash out. He withdrew. And that made it so much worse. The next few days were hell. I tried to act normal, tried to pretend that everything wasn't falling apart, but the air between us was thick with unspoken words. Adam barely spoke to me. When he did, it was short, to the point, as though he was talking to a colleague, not a wife. His eyes avoided mine, and that hurt more than anything. I tried to touch him again, but each time he pulled away. His body language was a constant reminder that I had lost him. He didn't want me. Not like he used to. Not like I needed him to. One evening I sat down on the couch next to him, trying to find some way to break through the barrier he had put up. I wanted him to talk, to yell, to say anything, but all he did was stare at the television, his expression blank. I asked him what was wrong and he just shrugged, muttering something about being tired. That was it. He didn't even look at me when he said it. It was then I realized that Adam had made a choice too. He had chosen to shut me out. He had chosen to build walls around his heart. Walls that I had created with my own hands. I had betrayed him, yes, but in doing so, I had also made him feel like he couldn't trust me anymore. He couldn't even stand to be close to me. I sat there in that suffocating silence, and for the first time, I truly understood the cost of my actions. I hadn't just ruined my marriage. I had ruined the trust we had built over the years. I had broken the foundation of our relationship, and now it was crumbling beneath me. The realization hit me harder than any confession could. Adam wasn't going to forgive me. Not right now. Maybe not ever. And I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to make things right. For days, I watched him as he retreated further and further into himself, as he withdrew from me. His touch was colder now, his words more distant. I tried to talk to him, tried to apologize, but all I got was silence. The silence that felt like a million knives to my heart. I kept telling myself it was my fault, that I had been the one who let things get this bad. But there was no comfort in that truth. No solace. Just the hollow ache of knowing that I had lost something precious. Something I would never get back. He wouldn't even let me touch him. Not anymore. The intimacy we once shared was gone. It was like I was a stranger, an outsider, someone who had no right to be in his life anymore. I wanted him back. I wanted to be close to him again. But I knew deep down that it wasn't going to happen. Not unless I could somehow earn his trust back. But how? How do you earn back trust once it's been shattered into 1,000 pieces? I didn't have the answers. All I had was the suffocating knowledge that I had done this to myself, and to him. And no matter how hard I tried, there was no way to undo the damage. And that was the hardest part. The not knowing. The not knowing if he would ever forgive me. The not knowing if I could ever forgive myself. The days that followed were consumed by a suffocating silence, one that seemed to stretch into eternity. I kept trying to bridge the gap between us, but Adam wasn't ready to meet me halfway. It wasn't that he hated me, he didn't. He just didn't know how to look at me the same way anymore. There were no harsh words, no blame, no anger. Just the cold absence of everything that once defined our relationship. I tried to be patient. I tried to give him space to let him process what had happened. But the longer I waited, the more I realized that I wasn't waiting for him to heal. I was waiting for him to forgive me. And somewhere deep down, I feared that forgiveness might never come. I knew what I had done was unforgivable. I had crossed a line that couldn't be erased with a simple apology. The betrayal, the lies, the guilt. It was all part of the wreckage I had left in my wake. And I was no longer sure if there was anything I could do to fix it. The trust between us had shattered, and no amount of pleading or regret would ever piece it back together. Every time I looked at Adam, I saw a man who had been broken by my actions. There was a hollow space where his affection for me once lived. His eyes, once filled with warmth, now held only a painful distance. And no matter how hard I tried to reach him, I couldn't bridge that gap. I had never truly understood how fragile trust was until now. I had taken it for granted, assumed that because we had been together for so long, our connection was unbreakable. But that wasn't the case. Trust, I learned the hard way, was something you earned every single day. And I had squandered it. It wasn't just the affair. It was everything that had led up to it. The way I had let our marriage slip into complacency, the way I had stopped communicating, stopped making an effort. It was the emotional distance I had created long before Mark came into the picture. And though the affair was the catalyst, it wasn't the root cause. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The affair. Mark. The guilt that had gnawed at me from the very first time I kissed him. It wasn't just the physical act that had unsettled me. It was the fact that I had given in to something I had long denied. I had convinced myself that I was justified, that it was just a moment of weakness, but deep down I knew better. The truth was I had betrayed not just Adam but myself. And now, every time Adam looked at me, I saw the consequences of that betrayal reflected in his eyes. I had turned the man who had loved me with such devotion into someone who couldn't even bear to touch me. I watched him move through the house like a ghost. His presence a reminder of everything I had destroyed. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. How could I fix this? How could I make him see that I was sorry? How could I make him believe that I never meant to hurt him, even though I knew deep down that I had? One evening, as we sat at the dinner table, the silence between us was suffocating. Adam barely touched his food. His eyes were fixed on the plate in front of him, and I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers clenched around his fork. He wasn't angry. He was just shut off, distant. I wanted to speak, to say something, but I couldn't find the right words. And in that moment I realized that there were no words that could fix this. I had broken something that couldn't be mended with promises or apologies. I had betrayed his trust, and the damage was done. I watched him leave the table without a word, retreating into the bedroom like a man trying to escape from something he couldn't face. I wanted to follow him, to hold him, to beg him to look at me the way he used to. But I knew it wouldn't change anything. He didn't want me. He didn't want this anymore. And I was powerless to fix it. The days blurred together after that. I kept going through the motions, trying to act like everything was fine, but it wasn't. I wasn't fine. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. All I could think about was the space between us. The emptiness that had replaced everything we once shared. I knew I had hurt Adam, but I also knew that I had hurt myself. The guilt was consuming, eating away at my insides, poisoning everything. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape the fact that I had betrayed the one person who had given me everything. And now I couldn't undo it. No matter how much I wanted to fix it, I couldn't. I spent hours staring at the walls, lost in thought, wondering where we went wrong. Was it the affair? Was it the way I had stopped trying to keep our marriage alive? Was it the way we had both allowed our love to fade into something comfortable, something routine? Or was it the fact that I had been too blind to see how much Adam had changed until it was too late? I thought about Mark often, too. The way he had made me feel seen, the way he had made me feel alive when I had long since stopped feeling that way with Adam. But I couldn't shake the guilt that came with thinking about him. I had chosen Mark over Adam, and now everything had unraveled. I hated myself for it. Hated myself for being weak, for seeking something outside my marriage, for allowing myself to slip into a fantasy of what could be instead of facing the reality of what was. I had betrayed the love I had once cherished with every part of me. And now the consequences were irreversible. There were moments in the quiet of the night when I would catch myself wishing for things to go back to how they were. Wishing I could turn back time and undo everything I had done. But it was pointless. Time didn't work that way. It never did. And no amount of wishing could bring back the trust one had destroyed. I couldn't blame Adam for pulling away. He had every right to. He had trusted me, loved me, given me everything, and I had thrown it all away. I had shattered the foundation of our marriage, and now it was up to me to live with the consequences. But the consequences weren't just about losing Adam's trust. They were about losing myself. I had lost the woman I used to be. The woman who loved with everything she had, who trusted with everything she could. I had become someone I didn't recognize. Someone driven by desire, by a craving for something more, without realizing that the more I was looking for was right in front of me all along. I had learned the hard way that trust, once broken, could never be fully restored. No matter how hard I tried, no matter how many apologies I made, the damage had been done. The wall between us was too high, too thick. Adam didn't trust me anymore. And honestly, I didn't trust myself. I didn't know how to fix what I had broken. Maybe there was no fixing it. Maybe we were both just too far gone. But I knew this for certain. I had lost more than just my husband. I had lost my own sense of who I was, and no one, not even Adam, could ever give that back to me. The road ahead seemed impossibly long, and the only thing I was sure of was that I didn't know how it would end. But I knew one thing: I couldn't go back. And neither could Adam.